Good evening. Let's bring this council meeting to order, Tuesday, October 1st. Can I have the roll?
Councilmember Evans?
Present.
Councilmember Edwards?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Randolph?
Here.
Mayor Millman?
Here.
Councilmember Best-Campbell?
Present.
Councilmember Arndt?
Here.
Councilmember Taylor?
Councilmember Taylor had notified us that he was going to be sick today and unable to make the meeting. I would entertain a motion at this point.
I move to excuse Councilmember Taylor from today.
Seconded.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Can we stand for the flag salute, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I move to accept
Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Arndt.
Sorry, I'd like to add an item to tonight's business items to discuss the city signing on to the UTC draft letter regarding PSE's low-income energy discount program.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. As the maker of the motion, you have the floor.
Thank you. This was an item that came to us kind of last minute, and there is a tight deadline on our choice whether or not to sign on, and I would just like to have the opportunity to discuss it as council.
Okay. Anybody else wish to discuss? Councilmember Evans.
In reading the email that we got admittedly late, it sounds like PSE is about to have a rate hike, and I think it's well worth us deciding if we want to sign on to this and have them reevaluate their low-income program.
Okay. Why don't we make that business item, or actually I need a vote, right? So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. We'll make that business item number 9. And what was the title of that one?
Discuss the city signing on to the UTC draft letter regarding PSE's low-income energy discount program.
Thank you. Okay.
I move to accept the agenda in order and content as amended.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We don't have any special presentations this evening. No, that's been canceled. We'll go on to public comments. Public comments, when I have one virtual, I believe. I don't, is that Kate?
Hello, good evening.
Hi. You have 3
Hi.
minutes. State your name and whether you live in the city limits, please.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Kate Krug-Garvey. I am the CEO of the King County Sexual Assault Resource Center. I do not live within the city limits of Woodinville, but KSARC, as we call it, does provide services to Woodinville. So first off, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to share this evening. As you know, the city of Woodinville has been a long, strong supporter and partner to the King County Sexual Assault Resource Center. KSARC provides sexual assault specific services for victims and families, 24-hour crisis intervention and referrals, legal advocacy through the criminal justice system, advocacy case management, parent education for caregivers whose children have been sexually abused, trauma-specific therapy, training for service providers, prevention programming, targeting high-risk youth. All of these services are free. All of them are provided in English and Spanish, as well as in Mandarin and in ASL. KSARC estimates that we'll serve at least 12 Woodinville residents per year for 24 and 25, and that's approximately 56 hours of advocacy that we'd be providing. On behalf of KSARC, I just want to thank all of you for being part of the solution to sexual violence. And to the survivors in our community, I want you to know that you are not alone. Chances are good that everyone here today knows someone who has been sexually abused. Half of women and 1/3 of men have experienced sexual assault in their lifetime. The trauma of sexual assault is something that can affect a survivor's mental, physical, and behavioral health and their ability to form healthy relationships. It often surprises people to learn that half of KSARC's clients are teens and children. But we know that recovery from trauma of sexual assault is possible. And thanks to the continued support of Woodinville, it remains possible. We're asking you to consider this budget season renewing your funding of KSARC at the $20,000 level. Funding will support everything that I just shared with you this evening, and services will help victims navigate criminal justice systems, access needed services for family members, and gain skills to protect and support their children or loved ones who have been victimized. We always say that you can't change what we can't talk about. So I just want to thank you for your leadership and your willingness to be loud about sexual assault and survivors in Woodinville. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Anybody else virtually wants to comment? We have anybody else? Okay. Moving on to the in-person. When I call your name, please come up to the microphone, state your name and whether you live in the city limits, and you'll have 3 minutes. First is Joan Curtin. No? Okay. Sure? Okay. David Bowling.
My name is David Bowling, and I do live in Woodinville city limits. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council members. I would like to start by thanking you for investing in human services and taking care of some of the most vulnerable people in our community. The funding changes lives and gives people a chance to get back to personal and housing stability and thrive and live into their best selves. So thank you for that. For many years, I was at Porch Light, formerly Congregations for the Homeless, and I want to thank you for the funding that we received from Woodinville for many, many years while I was there. It changed lives, and it felt good knowing that we were getting funding from this city and we're able to help Woodinville residents. I am here tonight as representing the Sophia Way. I'm a board member of the Sophia Way, who also does amazing work working with women experiencing homelessness or those who are no longer homeless because of the services that the Sophia Way provides. They have shelters, they have supportive services, mental health, all kind of services, case management to help people and the women they serve get back to stability and be safe and get back to housing and personal stability. They're serving hundreds of women a year and have about 150 women a year who achieve stable housing, permanent stable housing. I am talking to you about helping to support them. You have a grant in front of you for $10,000 a year for 2 years, and this money is so well invested. It's going to help several women from Woodinville who fall into homelessness find the stability and services they need to stabilize, get housing, get mental health and other supports, and not get stuck on our streets. Again, I just want to thank you for the decisions you have to make with a budget, and I really thank you for the work of considering the Sophia Way.
Thank you. Derek Seba, did I get that right?
Close.
Okay. State your name and whether you live in city limits. You have 3 minutes.
Derek Skiba. I do not live in the Woodinville city limits. Good evening. My name is Derek, and I am the executive director of an organization called Vision House. And this is a 34-year-old local nonprofit organization focusing on solving family homelessness in our area. Members of families make up about 1/3 of people experiencing homelessness, and yet you often don't see them on street corners. They're often trying to stay invisible in cars, couch surfing. I actually work with Sophia's Way as part of our network of providers that are a part of the solution to family homelessness in our community. Our demand for services right now is off the charts. This summer, on average, we're up 40% for requests for services above a normal summer. And we have greatly expanded our services to support this growth, however, especially here in the North End. Over the last 10 years, we have added transitional housing in the North End in Shoreline, serving 24 families through transitional housing. And just in this last year, we've added a diversion center in Lake Forest Park that is serving hundreds of families. With this support, we have been serving families from Woodinville and expect to serve more families from Woodinville in the future. Vision House works The outcomes are excellent. 90% of the families graduating from our transitional housing go on to permanent housing. Before you, you have a grant request to help support these services for $25,000. Over 2 years, it would be $50,000. We have really wonderful outcomes to point to, and we are expanding here in the North End in the future. This is an area of concern for us. On average, in this area, homelessness is up more than 10%. So the demand for services is high, and we're providing real solutions to end homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex Campbell.
Good evening. Alex Campbell, I live in the city limits. I'm going to talk on the topic of parking regulations tonight. And I just wanted to share with council that I this morning woke up with an idea. And so I did a quick impromptu poll on several Facebook groups covering probably almost 4,000, 5,000 people that focus specifically on Woodinville. In 9 hours, so that's all the time I gave people, put it out, took it away, we got 49 responses. Of those responses, exactly one said that they were in favor of parking reductions. That person actually in their profile, when I took a look, specifically calls out they live in Redmond. So I'm leaving them in the count. You can decide whether you want to include that or not. If you do include them, that's 2% of people who are in favor. Also, the conversation led to quite a few good comments. For your purposes, I'll read 4 quotes, just short ones. First was, I was about ready to quit going to the Saturday market because of parking, and there are multiple places I just don't go because the parking is so bad. Quote number 2, especially with little kids, it's just too much effort risk for a really long walk, and I'm not interested in having to pay for what should be my local hangouts. Third quote, you can't give us paid parking without viable transportation options, which Woodinville has none. And last quote, which is interesting because it bridges 2 topics tonight. We should not be allowing affordable housing to be used as a bargaining chip to underpark. So I just wanted to share that with you. Useful for your thoughts at this, the first vote and the second vote on the ordinance. I will also add a little piece of data. It occurred to me that we often hear structured parking costs $50,000, between $20,000 and $50,000, depends on the location. If you consider that the buildings that are being built have a 30-year lifespan, that's $4.56 a day, meaning that a developer who raises their rents by $5 a day or charges parking for $5 for a few hours will easily make back that money. And honestly, everybody I talk to wants more parking. So thank you very much for that, and please consider this as you go into the discussion tonight.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the consent calendar.
I move to accept the consent calendar as written.
Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. That brings us to our first business item. Business item number 5, consideration of 2025-2026 Human Services Grant Funding. Before we kick this off, I just wanted to say this is a great opportunity that I look forward to, but it's also a difficult role that we have because we have almost 3 times the requests versus the amount of money that we have budgeted. So unfortunately, whatever way this comes out, there's going to be very worthy grants that aren't going to be able to be funded, but we're going to try to do our best. So we have a staff report, and I believe Mr. O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I've prepared a brief presentation, and then from there we can have a discussion about funding allocations. I'll pull up a spreadsheet, and we can make those have those discussions. But first, a little bit of background. This program came about due to reductions in funding from the state and federal government that came about in the early 1990s. To account for this, Woodinville passed the Human Services Policy, which was in your packet tonight. I believe it was attachment 1, the first one. And what this did was establish this grant program. And that was to kind of, at least in part, fill some of that void from that missing funding. This grant is offered on a 2-year basis. So every 2 years, we open the grant for applications, and those awarded funding have a performance period of 2 years to complete their program. In 2020, it was a little bit of a different year due to COVID. There was a one-time grant of $400,000 that was made available to various programs for COVID relief. Again, in the last biennium, 23-24, we had another one-time COVID recovery grant fund. And for this biennium, we no longer have a COVID component to this grant, and we are back to just the regular Human Services Grant Program. And we have slightly increased the funding for this biennium's grant by $5,000 each year, or $10,000 total. There's a little bit of a caveat on that, and I'll touch on that a little later in my presentation. The city began advertising for applications in July. The application cycle closed at the end of August, and staff have spent much of September reviewing the applications and preparing for tonight's discussion. In total, there were over $461,000 in grant requests. For the next biennium, the city is budgeting for $150,000 for the 2 years, or $75,000 each. So this is a $10,000 increase over the 2 years from the previous biennium's funding. And I just want to note, while all of these programs meet the requirements, they're all noble and worthwhile causes and programs. Unfortunately, we have to balance between what we can do with what we have and everything else that the city is trying to balance. And that is where that $150,000 came in. But that same caveat I mentioned earlier relates to services for homelessness. So we budgeted $150,000 for this biennium's Human Services Grant Program. But in addition to that, we are proposing funding KCRHA, the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, $25,000 per year for a total of $50,000 for the biennium. And what this partnership does is it allows KCRHA to use much of our funds to go towards homelessness services, both locally and in the region. For this grant cycle, there were 4 programs specifically related to homelessness. Human Services Application 6, which is Porch Light, formerly Congregations for the Homeless, HS 8, Friends of the Youth, HS 13, Sophia's Place and Helen's Way, and HS 15, Vision House. As staff were preparing for tonight's agenda and trying to figure out the best way to have this discussion, what we would recommend to council is to remove these grants from consideration in favor of funding the KCRHA portion of the budget for that $50,000. That would simplify tonight's discussion, but while also ensuring that the city is paying our fair share towards the homelessness issues facing our city. I have prepared a brief summary of all of the applications. I'm happy to go through them or answer any questions, but they're also found in your packet in attachment 2. In addition to what's on the screen here in the packet, I've also included the funding allocations for the previous or the current biennium, their requests for 25 and 26, and their total request for the biennium. In total, we had 16 applications, all of which met eligibility requirements. taking our recommendation a little bit further, what staff is recommending tonight for council to consider is a funding plan that focuses on some of our local partners. So North Shore Senior Center, the King County Sexual Assault Resource Center, Meals on Wheels, the Catholic Community Services of Western Washington, Kindering Developmental Evaluation Services, North Shore Schools Foundations programs, and the YMCA. By focusing on these local programs that have proven to serve directly in the city of Woodinville, that brings down the total request to $152,498, getting us about $2,500 off from our recommended budget amount of $150,000 for the biennium. So I'll pause here for any questions. If there are no questions, if you could give me a consensus or direction on whether you would like to start the discussion with the local recommendation, without the local recommendation, but excluding the homelessness applications, or starting from looking at all 16 of the applications and starting from scratch.
Okay. Councilmember Arndt, kick us off, please.
Thank you. I know that for the first time, our funding of human services looks different because of our ILA with KCRHA. And so kind of recap in the past, at our last discussion on Council for Human Services, we said we want this money to go to fund homelessness services in our area, and we allocated it. And then we signed this ILA with KCRHA, and they are now assuming those contracts. So our funding of that ILA through KCRHA will then fund the contracts that we had previously divvied money up through our human services grant portfolio. So by excluding them, we are not excluding funding of homelessness services. We're just funding it in a different route. So I fully would support dropping Porchlight, Friends of Youth, and Sophia Way from the discussion of this because they receive funding through KCRHA. Vision House, which does provide homeless services, does not receive funding through KCRHA, and so there could be an argument there for leaving them into the discussion this evening. And then I would also, at least as a starting point, appreciate the efforts that were put in here for the local services funding recommendation. I have notes on some tweaks that I would like to make, of course, but I do think that this is a good starting place for our discussion for this evening.
Councilmember Best-Campbell.
I like the breadth that we have here. It's not focused on one thing. I particularly wanted to draw attention to the Catholic Community Services. This dovetails into a conversation that we had at the last meeting regarding keeping people in housing. I like the opportunity to keep people in housing. I think funding homelessness is important, but I also think preventing people from becoming homeless in the first place is also really useful. Meals on Wheels and the backpacks for kids and community meals, that hits people right where they live, which is in their stomach and in their homes. That is a direct impact on people's lives. For years, I used to do Meals on Wheels delivery, and sometimes the delivery drivers are the only people some of these people see in a week. So it's truly putting eyeballs on people and nourishing them in both socially, physically, and otherwise. I think that these programs are incredibly important, and because they're run locally, because they're run by people and we know exactly who is receiving these benefits, I just think it runs the gamut of all the things that are incredibly important to us. I don't think it's a good idea to pick one area and fund it. I think that if we hit people where you eat, where you go to school, where you live, and your physical safety, I think that pretty much is targeted in everything up there. And again, that we would have the money in the COVID funds to pay more for these programs. But, reality is reality, and money does not grow on trees from what I've heard. And this is, to me, I think I'd like to thank staff for coming up with this. I think this is a very fair representation of the great things that we can do with the limited funds that we have. So I like what I'm seeing. If we want to play with the money here and there, I think that's okay, but I really do appreciate these programs and how it dovetails into conversations that we had before. So good job.
Anybody else? Councilmember Evans.
What other communities are in the ILA for the KCRSA? Do we know? Sorry.
I don't know offhand.
Pop quiz.
We can try to look that up for you in the next few minutes.
Yeah, because I know we're committed to that, and we've committed our funding there. I was just wondering what other, if I remember right, it's the northern part of King County into Bothell? Shoreland, Bothell, Kenmore. Okay. So a pretty good number of residents and places to pull money from. All right. Thank you. That was my question.
Anybody else? Does anybody have a motion? Councilmember Arndt.
So I would like to move to fund our human services grants with the proposed funding from staff with the following modifications. I would reduce the YMCA funding. Oh.
I'm pulling up the spreadsheet. Apologies.
I can't think now. I need my visual aid.
So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hide these first three. Whoops. Apologies for the interruption.
Are we good? Councilmember Arndt?
Okay, so I'm a little off now because I was using the former slide as my talking point. So
I can put that back up if that'd be easier.
Can we toggle back and forth?
So let's see if we can go from this. So I was making a motion to use your staff recommendations as presented with the following modifications to reduce the YMCA funding to $10,000 from $20,000, and to split that then gives us $10,000 to we could split between Vision House and CHS, which was not on your list. So I'm just messing up everything. But that would be my proposed motion.
Okay, and do I have a second?
I would second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Councilmember Arndt.
So just little tweaks to the proposed funding guidelines. I appreciate what staff did, trying to highlight the local organizations and where our small amounts of funding can help. I reduced the funding to the YMCA for their meals program because in the last biennium, they did struggle a little bit with using the funds that we had allocated for them in their meal program, and they had to pivot that. And I'm not fully confident that they have a workable program to then use those funds in the same way. They were a little bit constrained by our grant funding guidelines on their program. So I think reducing that and then allowing some of those funds to then be spread out to a couple of other organizations, I think is just just letting it spread a little bit further into our community. I know CHS does combine their funding with Medicaid and Medicare, so they have a strong funding source, but of course they offer behavioral health resources that are really important to our community, and they're offering free behavioral health resources for youth right now. So these are really important things that we need.
Can I ask a quick question with this recommendation? So based on your recommendation of reducing YMCA by $10,000 and then splitting the $10,000 between Vision House and Centers for Human Services, that still gives us a deficit of $2,000, roughly $500. Is your motion to increase the budget to accommodate that, or did we want to make any adjustments anywhere else to bring us down to $150,000?
So I guess my motion was to stick with the staff recommended $2,000 over initial budget.
Okay.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, thank you for that work. You put a lot of thought and effort into it. I appreciate that. No more discussion? Okay, let's have a roll call vote.
Councilmember Evans,
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards,
Aye.
Councilmember Best-Campbell,
Yes.
Mayor Millman,
Yes.
Councilmember Arndt,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Randolph.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0. Thank you very much. Business item number 6, Lodging Tax Advisory Committee Grant Recommendations for 2025. Mr. O'Neill again.
Thank you. Just give me 1 second. I'll pull another brief presentation up. So this one should be even easier. First, a little history. This program is funded through a tax that is received on admissions to our local hotels. It is required by state law to go towards tourism activities, and where the city is able to select through a formal process, in our case a grant program, how those funds are used. We do that through what is known as the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee. The committee reviews applications, makes a recommendation, and then council gets to either adopt that recommendation or send the item back to the LTAC committee with notes and for further deliberation. The LTAC committee is made up of a council member for this year. That council member is Councilmember Evans, who serves as the chair, a representative from 2 of our local hotels. In this case, at this point in time, we only have 2, so 1 from each of our 2 hotels, but that'll change in the future where if we have more than 2, we'll have to figure out some kind of rotation where 2 of them sit on the committee. And then the last 2 members represent our tourism organizations, which in this case is our Chamber of Commerce and Woodinville Wine Country. Last year, the LTAC committee recommended and council adopted a new strategy for maintaining a reserve balance. In previous years, it had been based on an average of, I think, 3 years and a certain percent of that average. It is now at $50,000, just a flat reserve. So maintaining that policy, our finance department estimated that there would be $191,000 in available funding to be allocated in the grant program.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
What's the stated purpose or reasoning for that flat $50,000? What is the intention down the road if lodging is less than, that we can make up that with this reserve fund? Is that the intent, or is there something that I'm missing?
So the reserve is there, yeah. This is all based on projections, revenue projections. So, should our estimates have been off by somewhere in the $50,000 range or lower, we would then dip into that reserve and be able to cover any fluctuations in those estimates.
Is that written into their rules, or is that something that we approve automatically? Or if that were to occur, can they just do that, or do they have to come back and say, hey, we have to dip into that $50,000? How's that work?
We would just dip into it because we have awarded the grants, but that would then impact next year's awards because we would have to rebuild that reserve from those revenues, and thus there'd be less to divvy out.
Okay, thank you.
So for this year, we received 10 applications, which is down from 11 in the previous year, although it's kind of good news because that 11th application that we did not receive was from the Arts Alliance, and the reason they did not submit that application was because they felt that after years of support from the city, they are able to be self-sufficient in that program, so they no longer needed LTAC funding. So that was great news. All 10, staff reviewed all 10 for eligibility. They all met eligibility requirements, which are listed here. Things like being located in the city, has to be a nonprofit, et cetera. So on the screen is a list of all of the grant applications and the committee's recommended funding level. It's also in the packet, the agenda item. But this was a very easy process. Essentially, we had a brief conversation. We had one go-around of discussions, and the LTAC committee recommends what you see before you, which is a slight reduction to 3 of the programs, 2 for the Chamber, 1 for Wine Country, and all of the other programs funded at 100%. So at this point, I'm happy to answer questions, but council essentially has 2 options. One is to fund the grants per the LTAC's recommendation, or 2, provide funding, or provide comments that I can then take back to the LTAC committee for further deliberation and a new recommendation.
Councilmember Evans.
Thank you. Could we go back one slide, please? So I want to speak to the $20,000 that we took off of Woodinville Wine Country. They actually wanted that money to be able to give business grants, but we didn't feel legally that it was something that we should step up to because it would be really hard for us to oversee and make sure that there's in compliance. And so this was something that we just decided it was a last minute kind of ad, and they were trying to fund their data-driven engagement platform and then be able to allow businesses to go halvesies on ads around. And we didn't feel like legally we were there, and we also didn't want to make that commitment on the city's behalf without us having the opportunity to talk about it at council and also for our city attorney to weigh in on it. And so Woodinville Wine Country said, fine, great, we can do $30,000, it pays for our engagement. So that one is fully funded. And then the chamber felt like the $34,000 would get them the bare minimum. It's like the middle level of what they wanted. So they had the bare minimum, the minimum, or the middle, and then the high amount. So the $48,500 was the high amount, but they felt like they could make do with the $34,000 and really still do a lot of stuff. So we were able to fully fund the smaller things that are really here, and it's the bigger ones where they had a little bit of flex to be able to take some of that hit where we made it, and at the end everybody was quite happy. So I'm just putting that out there.
Thank you. Councilmember Best-Campbell.
So I had a question about the summer concerts. So there are wine sales and beer sales. Does the chamber get a percentage of that? And were those businesses able to make a profit, break even? I know it's not technically part of this, but I would just like to see what benefit it has, not just for the chamber itself for putting it on, but are we benefiting the businesses that are there? I know you probably don't have this information now, but if somebody could find that out, I think it would be appropriate to find out, are the vendors breaking even at these events? Are they not breaking even? Is it a wash? I'd like to see, beyond just the tourism impact, is there a positive economic impact on these businesses? So not tonight, obviously, Mr. Fritz, I know you don't have that, but I know you know ways to find those things.
Yeah, we can circle back and get you that information.
Councilmember Evans.
I was just going to say we have the just prior term chamber president here. Troy, I don't know if you want to be on the spot or we can follow up later, but I know that what the city of Woodinville gives to the chamber for these events doesn't cover the events. So
I'm not sure if the specific question can get answered tonight.
okay, great. We'll follow up. Thank you.
I can add to that. I don't know the overall impact, but I did talk to Fresh Cuts that had a booth there, and he was very happy with the result. And it wasn't just what he made there, because he gave away all his money to charity, but he got lots of business, new business for his business. So he didn't necessarily make money at the event. He didn't make any money at the event, but he did make money with new customers. So I think that was, they would tell you that that was pretty successful. I talked to him personally, so.
I move to approve the funding of the 2025 lodging tax grant as recommended by the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Deputy Mayor, would you like to comment to your motion?
Real briefly, I think that this is actually doing what we intended to do as we set out to actually fund this by the funders. So what actually rotates back into the LTAC is actually regenerating itself, and as Mayor Millman proposed, I think it generates new business from people coming into the city to the concerts and actually enjoying our events. It also gives us a venue to discuss things with people in the community and a place for them to go and do things in the summer, winter, and throughout the year. So I really appreciate what's going on with this program.
Anybody else? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Number 7, study session, North Shore School District School Impact Fees. Mr. Grumbaugh.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. Just give me 1 second to bring the presentation up. I do want to note we do have Kelsey here with North Shore School District, and she's going to take you through this presentation. I also want to note that we do have a slide at the end of their presentation, as we're going to be asking for some feedback from the council in what you want to set the school impact fees for 2025.
All right, welcome. Thank you. My name's Chelsea Starkey, and I am an assistant fiscal director at North Shore School District, and I am presenting on the capital facilities plan today. So thank you for the time today. One comment, I love coming to the city hall because right out there I can see students out there likely and kids, and it just, yeah, it's always cool just to get back to students. So presenting on the capital facilities plan today, it's our 6-year plan, and it's essential because rolling this out does impact our school district in the capital facilities and the capital funds when we're looking at our capital plan in general. So with that, let's go on to the next slide. So we are expecting a growth of around 1,906 students over the next 6 years, and that's about 8.5% of our student population, and that's between 2023 and 2029. And so this growth is projected at all levels. So when we're looking at the elementary band, the middle school band, and the high school band, that is where the growth is occurring at all 3 bands. And so how do we come up with these projections? What we look at is the birth rates, very specifically on the birth rates. We look at local housing trends, what's occurring in the local housing market. So every October, we are looking at every single permit, every application across our entire jurisdiction. And also within this, what we are seeing is that we are still seeing continued growth. There was a post-pandemic and during the pandemic issue that we were seeing that we weren't growing as fast, but we have rebounded from that, and we have seen increase in students, just not at the same rate. It's just still increasing the student population. All right, next. So just looking at North Shore School District as a whole, we have 21 elementary schools and an early childhood center in Bothell. We have 6 middle schools with Leona Middle School in Woodinville. We have four comprehensive high schools and 2 choice high schools. And so one of the things just looking at when you look at our facilities as a whole, we have been portable heavy. We experienced massive growth, and for that to compensate, we had to have portables in place. And so, so that interim capacity is looking at portables. So when we had the 22 bond, it was specifically looking at replacement of portables and making those fixed seats, not in a portable. So what do we do to address that capacity planning for 24 through 2029? One of the biggest things that we had was in February of 22, we passed the $425 million capital bond. And in that, one of the main charges was replacing portables with permanent housing for students. And it was a big undertaking. There's 8 growth projects occurring right now, 2 of which are phased. So Leota is a phased project, and so is Ingamore. But the remaining 6 projects are a single phase project, and it's a lot of work. There's a lot of work happening within North Shore, but specifically in all of those is taking portable space and making it permanent housing for students. One last thing, we look at if you don't mind going back, please. One last thing on there is, we look at the big projects, but there's also some of the smaller projects too, which are really big wins. Making inclusive playgrounds for students at elementary school. We just had a ribbon cutting for Frank Love Elementary. Really cool just to be able to see that no longer are children trying to access playgrounds through wood chips. They're getting onto wheelchair accessible locations. So that's really cool to see. All right, I wanted to highlight that. All right, so how can we, why and how are we able to collect impact fees? So authorized under the Growth Management Act is to be able to, school impact fees are authorized under the Growth Management Act and are applied only to new residential units, so new growth. The fees are calculated on growth-related capacity needs and must be proportionate to the impact of the new development. Later in the slides, we'll talk about the impact fees and just a little bit more detail about how it's calculated. But it's important to know that impact fees cannot be used to address existing deficiencies. So growth only is towards growth. They must support growth. All right, next. All right, and so for the school impact fee for 2024, it plans to include growth-related projects cost funded through the 22 bond, and the capacity additions are planned at Bothell, Ingamore, and North Creek High Schools, as well as several of the elementary schools. And these projects are essential to maintaining adequate space and resource for our growing student population. So just looking ahead, planning the facilities, that's what our community expects from us. So the proposed school impact fees for City of Woodinville are as follows. Single family, the proposed is $15,159, which is down from last year's fee, which is currently at $16,957. The townhouse dwelling unit, that's $5,414, which is an increase from $4,182. And the multifamily dwelling unit, that is probably the most decrease, which is down to $254, which the current fee was at $1,687. And just one of the biggest questions when looking at that, quickly is, 2 of them are down, 1 of them's up. You would think all of them are down. And you would think that until you start looking at the formula. And so the formula for it is composed of 3 parts. The first part is how much are we going to receive per student from the state? And the great thing is that's increased, which is a really remarkable thing per student that has increased, but it didn't increase enough to really change the bottom line. So that the second portion of it is how much are we planning to receive in present value from the taxpayer? Once they get the house and they pay the impact fee, well, we anticipate how much are they planning to pay the school district over the next 10 years. So we calculate that. And that formula is made up of assessed value, what's the levy rate, and then it also takes into account the bond rate. So we anticipate what is it, and they get credit for that. The final part is what does it cost per student for permanent space in construction. And that final part is the biggest part of it, is mostly founded on the student generation rate.
We have a question.
Yeah,
Councilmember
sorry,
Evans.
I was like, do I finish or go ahead, Councilmember Evans?
Sorry, I just have to jump in on this because we passed on multifamily tax exempts for affordable housing exemptions. And from what I'm seeing here, the amount that you're seeing in children coming to schools from multifamily dwelling units is not a huge factor in the growth, that it's more coming from the other areas. Is that a correct way to read this?
Yeah, that is correct, because our student generation rate is the foundation of this entire formula. When you look at single-family rates, out of 100 homes for single-family, we expect to get 57 children.
Okay.
When we look at townhouses, we expect to get 27. And when we look at multifamily, we expect to get 13. So it's proportionate that the fee is based off of how many children we're anticipating from that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Councilmember Arndt.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question to that. How often do you revise that rate? Is that revised regularly? Have you seen changes recently as housing stock is shifting?
So we do review the capital facility plan every single year. So we go through all the local housing, we look at the birth rates, and we assess everything every single year. So the student generation rate is always looking at the last 5 years and then seeing from those individual addresses how many students were generated. And fortunately, we have a great consultant that helps out with that, but it is assessed. The capital facilities plan is looked at every year in October. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that jumped ahead in the formula. So there was 3 parts, really, how much does it cost to build a permanent seat, give them credit for their state match construction assistance program, and then the third is give them credit for how much they're going to pay in taxes towards the schools in the future out years. So even though at quick glance, 2 go down, 1 go up, you can't really, it's a little bit deeper than that. So, but yeah, those are the proposed rates for the city of Woodinville.
Councilmember Evans.
Sorry, I just have one more. Yeah. We can't change these. You are bound by state law for these formulas, and this is basically you just informing us, right?
That is correct. And one aspect on the last end of that is, good point, is it is a formula and it is reduced by 50%. So since these are looking at futures and projections, it does get cut by 50%. So, but it is by state law.
You're bound by the state law and the math. Okay, thank you.
The math is mathing, yes. Thank you.
Any other questions?
All right, next slide.
I'm just going to add also your specific ordinance, so not just state law.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Yes, that was Executive Director Dree Ralph. She has been doing this for many years, my first year, but we are in multiple jurisdictions, so yes, specifically also in the city of Woodinville. All right, and I will take any additional questions that might have not come up during that time.
Councilmember Best-Campbell.
I just wanted to say that we've been doing this since 2019, I think was when we first started this. The numbers have fluctuated over the years because of formulas and vagaries and actuarial tables and things that'll bore everybody to tears. But I appreciate that you're checking it every year, and the fees that you have been asking for and you've been receiving from the city, we're starting to see construction and we're starting to see remediation of some really old buildings. So I'm happy with the work that you're doing, even though in times of higher inflation, you're still seeing these numbers go down. So in my mind, you are being judicious, you are going through the data. In terms of staff, I think these numbers are fine the way they are. I don't think we should discount them. There's a lot of work that goes into it. And it is important that even though we are a growing city, we still need to keep North Shore being the best school district to be in, obviously. So that's just my recommendation.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, I wanted to tell you I appreciate the work, the presentation, you being here and give us the information. I'd also add I came in 1992 because of the North Shore School District and raised 2 boys that went through the district, and really appreciate the contribution. They were wonderful experience for our family, except for the portables. That was one thing that I'm happy to see that you guys are working hard to mitigate. So thank you.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you for those kind words. I've got 2 children in the school district as well, and they've been in a portable land before, and so I really appreciate that. And just to follow up, If there is no other questions, I do want to let you guys know that there is a Wooden Elementary groundbreaking that's occurring on October 9th at 5 p.m. So though not in Woodinville, still serving some of the Woodinville students. So thank you.
Thank you. Business item number 8, first reading of ordinance number 769, amending chapter 21.37 pertaining to off-street parking. Mr. Grumbaugh.
Mayor, before we go to that, can I just get clarification? So is option A the council's preference then when we come forward with the school impact fees for you?
That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let me go ahead and bring up my presentation. All right, and this is going to be fairly short. We had a pretty good long discussion at the last council meeting, did the study session on it. And so most of what tonight is just basically following up from that meeting. As noted, it is the first reading of the ordinance. And let's give this a second. All right, yeah, first reading of the ordinance 769. And so at the study session we had on September 17th, we presented the Planning Commission's recommendation and summarized the proposed changes. And then there was 2 questions that staff took from that council wanted us to follow up on. The first one was a look at considering lowering the reduction allowance proposed in, and this would be WMC 2137-0801, which is our parking modification section. So the current proposal has 40%, and the thing to be looked at was potentially reduce that down to 35%. And then the other council item that was brought up was about looking at lowering parking standards as an incentive for affordable housing. So I'll start real quick on the parking modification, and I talk a little bit more about this in the staff report. So as I mentioned, this is looking more specifically at WMC 2137-0801, which is known as the optional multi-use shared parking. And I wanted to highlight that there's actually 2 requirements in this allowance. And I would note that this is just because an applicant requests, it doesn't mean it's an automatic thing. It's actually an optional thing that's discretionary. Ultimately at the Development Services Director's decision as to whether to approve a parking reduction. But these would be the criteria that would be have to be satisfied in order to get the reduction. So the first part is that basically you have to show that the reduction doesn't go below the calculated peak parking demand. So I think we talked about this a little bit more, and certainly if you've seen the Planning Commission, we really got into this. When you've got like multiple uses going on and they're sharing parking spaces, they don't necessarily all generate the same parking demand at the same time throughout the day. So when you're doing these calculations, you're looking at the various time that different uses might generate parking, and then you're looking at when the maximum amount of parking might be needed by all of those uses. So the first criteria on this is that your reduction can't go below that peak parking demand per the analysis that you do. And then the second part of this is, even if you were able to demonstrate peak parking demand was could be like 50 or 60%, the maximum reduction is limited to still 40%. The current code doesn't have that peak parking demand, and it currently allows up to a 50% reduction and doesn't really put any criteria around it. New code does do that. And then we wanted to take, because one of the things in looking at this proposal to reduce from 40% to 35%, we took kind of a quick glance at seeing how that might have impacted some of the past projects. Again, kind of give you a summary of the ones over the last 7 years where we've done these parking reduction studies. And there are several projects highlighted up here that would not have probably been able to occur with the 35% cap, although I am going to qualify that because the methodology that's been used to do parking reduction studies has kind of varied over the years. That's one of the reasons this new code lays out more specific criteria, so there's going to be better consistency. So exact impacts are kind of difficult to gauge, but in general, you could probably anticipate that these projects probably would have struggled to be able to have been built if they hadn't been able to have some a parking reduction per what they were requesting. The other thing I want to note too, because we also, when we look at these parking reductions, there's assumptions that are made as to what the business is or the uses are going to be the tenants in those buildings. And when you have these parking reduction allowance, it creates greater flexibility with future uses or future tenants going there that might have a higher parking generation rate. So again, not knowing exactly, being able to predict what the full impacts are, but it does know that it does create less flexibility. if you want to reduce it down. The lower you make that cap, the less flexibility there'll be for that. So that was our look at as far as the reduction. The other point brought up by council was looking at lowering parking standards for affordable housing. This one was kind of interesting in that, there was a requirement, and I think I may have mentioned this in the presentation. There is a requirement, and it's incorporated in here, where the Growth Management Act actually requires reduction in parking standards when you're near certain transit facilities that are operating at a certain amount of buses and other types of transit coming in and out. Woodinville currently doesn't have any transit facilities that actually operate at that high of a level, so the GMA requirement, while we have to adopt it, doesn't actually come into play. But from when I was trying to take a look around at some of the other jurisdictions to see what they're doing with this, I didn't really find a whole lot of specifics towards affordable housing. A lot of them adopted GMA. I would also note, though, that not everybody necessarily has completed their updates based on the recent stuff going on with comp plans and stuff, so we could potentially see more. But from what I saw currently, just looking through, the GMA seems to be one of the main tools. And then there was a couple of jurisdictions, like, for example, Bellevue allows you to increase the number of compact stalls, which, if anybody's not familiar, compact stalls are smaller than your traditional stalls. In Woodinville, we don't allow compact stalls, so for us, that wouldn't be something we would be able to do unless we were going to start enabling compacts again. But Bellevue allows you to increase the amount of those as a substitute with affordable units. And then in the case of Bothell, while they didn't specifically identify affordable housing specifically, middle housing tends to fall kind of in that affordable, though it's usually over the 80% AMI. But it still tends to fall into a little bit more of a moderate range. And they actually waive the parking requirements for middle housing when it's on those smaller lots of 6,000 square feet. And then the other thing I wanted to note, a lot of jurisdictions do have lower standards when they have transit services. So when you have stuff within those distances, like core downtown areas, they do tend to have lower parking requirements. Kenmore was a great example of that. And then I also wanted to note that Growth Management Act does have some new stuff that came out of some of the recent bills where they are trying to encourage, among other things, in offering to promote affordable housing, that you might want to take a look at reduced parking as one of those incentives. Again, as I mentioned, I haven't seen anything too specific yet in at least the ordinances that I took a look at from other jurisdictions, but it doesn't mean jurisdictions aren't looking at that. And I also did want to highlight the fact that we do have one incentive on parking related to affordable housing that is in the Planning Commission's recommendation, which is basically allowing for if you have a on-street parking adjoining the site, that you could potentially count that towards your required. And part of this was because we wanted to try to create some incentives, but because I think everybody's familiar, the transit services in here are a bit more limited on what's being offered here. So we were trying to strike a balance, and so when the Planning Commission made their recommendation, they agreed to include looking at allowing on-street to count in lieu of some of the off-street parking spaces.
Robert, yes. First off, planning was, their recommendations of the 40% number. Is that what came out of planning?
That's correct.
When they were looking at that, did they, because I'm always interested in what our local cities are doing, our competitors, our adjacent cities, or our comparables, did they look at what comparable cities are doing for their parking reductions?
I don't believe I don't recall the Planning Commission looking at comparables, but I did, because as a result of the question that came up at the last council meeting, I tried to take a look around, and I actually remember when I was looking through, as we were drafting this together, I did look at some of the other jurisdictions. And it does kind of vary, but I mean, in general, there's a lot of copying that jurisdictions do of others' regulations. And so a lot of other places I saw did have the 50% in their codes. Some had a little bit less, but it seemed like most that offered reductions. If they did put a cap on it, it tended to be like around that 50% if there was a cap on it. Not everybody necessarily had caps, and some jurisdictions are a little bit more strict in how they would also allow for the reductions. So it can vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
Councilmember Evans.
So thank you for outlining these ones where they had reductions. So for example, Harvest Retail at 44.5%. And then we come to find out that the actual occupants have lower parking requirements. So the impact is still to be determined, but it's likely less than that 44%. I think, just taking a look around the city, we have a nearly empty park and ride. You go to the Hagen area, and a lot of that parking lot is empty. I think that we need to be able to be flexible and take a look at development agreements that come in. And I also think that if we are serious about affordable housing, we need to give developers space to negotiate that so that we can make space for, a 50 to 80% AMI and have places for people to be. And if we require a huge amount of parking, that's not going to happen. We're not going to be able to support our strategic initiative of having affordable housing. And so nothing in this says that we will automatically grant a 40%. It just says that this is something that is available if the conditions are right. So for example, if we have an affordable housing complex and there is ample street parking, it might make sense, or it might not. We would have to look at it development by development. But I think that it makes good sense to at least put the flexibility there so that as future development agreements come before this council, that the council can take a look at what is presented at that time and not be constrained by something, that we pass where we don't even know what that future development's going to be. So with that, I would like to move to pass the first reading of ordinance number 769 relating to off-street parking regulations as presented.
Second. I have a motion and a second. Maker of the motion, you have the floor.
This council again and again and again has said that we are behind affordable housing. Every one of us has supported that. And I think that we need to make sure that we are thoughtful about the rules that we put in place that could either reduce the affordable housing attractiveness or even viability in Woodinville, or supporting it. And again, nobody's saying this is just going to happen. We would have to look at it development agreement by development agreement. So I think this just makes good sense to give ourselves and future councils the ability to evaluate what's before them.
I'd like to amend the main motion to include a change from a 40% reduction down to a 20% reduction. I think that we've seen what the current status looks like in Woodinville, and when you go down and look at the new developments, the universal refrain from people is there's nowhere to park. And when I can find a place to park, I have to pay to park, and I don't want to pay to park. So the problem I have is that developers come to us and say, look, we have this paperwork that shows we can get away with less parking. After everything is built, businesses come to us and complain that the lease that they just signed for 10 years has inadequate parking. So on the one hand, parking reductions are great for developers, but in the long run, they're bad for businesses. An example recently is...
Councilmember Best-Campbell.
I'm speaking to the main motion, and I'm making the amendment to the motion, and as speaker, I am allowed first speech.
You can make the motion. You have not received a second. Once you receive a second, then you can speak to the motion. And you didn't wait to be recognized. So is there anybody that wants to second Councilmember Best-Campbell's motion? Seeing none, motion fails due to lack of a second. Councilmember Best-Campbell.
So back to the point. We're doing a short-term win for businesses, for developers who say, we don't need all of this parking. But in the long term, businesses are having a problem. So Lifted Taco closed because they said they are not getting enough turnover, and they're not getting enough people coming in. And even when you look at Wooden Creek, they had a 12.5% parking reduction, which we thought was incredibly modest at the time, but it still impacts whether or not people are coming in and cycling through the community. So I'm not saying we need to turn it into a concrete parking jungle, but we've gone the extreme of saying we're going to limit parking, and I think it's myopic to only consider affordable housing. Yes, that's one part of it, but we also require businesses to keep us going and keep people coming here. We've seen Woodinville's tourism go from 750,000 people a year to almost 1.2 million. It's the same amount of space and the same number of parking spaces, and we're having growing pains. I think that requiring a little bit less till we could swing a little bit further away from giving developers everything they want to giving the community what we need, I think that's a risk I'm willing to take, because there is in no way we are overparked down in the wineries area. These new construction projects are not overparked. They're grossly underparked, which is why we see our public lots close to all the other facilities crowded. So I wanted to move for 20%. I know it's not going to happen, but this is why. We're seeing people unable to get to the businesses, and we're seeing businesses leave Woodinville because people are unwilling to walk a great distance from a parking structure that the city may or may not build to these locations. And I think it's ridiculous that on the one hand, we allow these parking reductions, and on the other hand, the city is considering building a parking lot, which is true. Either we're underparked or we're overparked. But to me, these are two disparate concepts that can't exist in the same world. And to say that these projects wouldn't exist without these parking reductions, I think is a developer feeding us a line. I think that they will always tell us, this is $1 billion and those $400,000 we spend on those parking spaces are gonna kill the project. Let's see. I'm tired of building and constructing in Woodinville on the basis of what developers ask for. I'm not here to do what developers ask for. I'm here to look at why it's not working and what we can do to make it work. So I think we should make a little bit more of an effort to have slightly more parking until the glorious day when bus service is reinstated in Woodinville.
Councilmember Arndt.
Thank you. I know this is a very difficult and sensitive topic. I am a resident of Woodinville. I drive downtown. I have to find parking. It's so annoying. I was almost late to council a few meetings ago because I couldn't find a parking spot outside of City Hall. I struggle with this as well. I support the Planning Commission's recommendations and this ordinance because I think it is a very delicate balance. I think we are at that kind of tipping point regionally, and maybe it hasn't trickled down into Woodinville as much yet, but we are in this point of paradigm shift where we are growing at such a rate that we cannot add enough parking to ensure that there is always enough parking wherever people want to go. We will have to, as a community, come together and be creative and use some solutions that exist in many other parts of the world for getting people in and out of places. But I realize that we're not quite there. We're just in the transition point, and we do need to have parking. So I support this ordinance. It was also very interesting when we were doing a community walkthrough with the Creative District, and we had someone from the state down here. They were walking through our city, and they were like, basically saying like, oh, you got the wrong kind of city. It's all strip malls and parking lots, and that's not super great for this creative economy we're trying to build. And the comments was basically that we have so many parking lots in our downtown that we are wasting this precious space. So I think that is also a consideration when I'm looking at this parking, is designing and using our most precious resource, which is the land in our city, in the most effective way possible. So I'm happy to keep the caps a little higher in the interest of providing some flexibility to future council as they consider project by project. I like that there are some reductions for affordable housing and that things from the GMA that maybe don't apply to us today are still included, so that as our transit service shifts, as other things come to our city, that we can then shift with it.
Any other discussion? Comments? Councilmember Best-Campbell.
So I'm concerned now that we're going to vote on this, we're going to allow this reduction. Most of these parking reductions come to staff, and staff makes the decision for us. It doesn't come before us, so unless we're going to add a specific item in here that says every parking reduction has to come to council, we're just punting and letting staff take the hit for us. So I move that we add that every parking reduction would come before council.
Motion fails. I would like to comment or ask a question and comment. A few things there. So I talked to the Lifted Taco guy, and he's not leaving because of parking. That was not the issue. we have a city manager, and his role is to negotiate a DA that he does bring to us. And at that point, I like the flexibility to be able to say that we can negotiate for public benefits that we want, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. So I like to have the flexibility and have the bargaining chip to be able to negotiate and direct our city manager on what we would like a direction to negotiate. And that's his job, and he's very good at it. So I would like to see us stay with the planning recommendation. And I will echo Councilmember Arndt's thoughts on parking has been a challenge ever since I've been on council. And one of the reasons is that lots of changes to businesses happened without the prerequisite parking requirements as more wine tasting venues popped up, which means instead of somebody popping in and out to a retail establishment, they'll sit there for 2 or 3 hours sipping their wine. So that means the parking's clogged up. So we haven't kept up to that. But I will add that we are working on public transit, which is impactful to parking. We are working on a parking solution in the Hollywood Hill area that's woefully underparked. We have the opportunity in front of us with the East Rail mixed use, and we have the opportunity to add parking there. So we are looking at solutions, but I certainly would like us to see, and future council have some flexibility to negotiate that. Anybody else? A motion?
There's already been a motion.
Yes, she's already done the motion.
I'm sorry.
Discussion.
That was a long time ago. I apologize. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Evans?
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards?
Aye.
Councilmember Best-Campbell?
No.
Mayor Millman?
Yes.
Councilmember Arndt?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Randolph?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries 6-1.
5-1.
Or, I'm sorry, we're missing one, 5-1. Okay, public, oh, I'm sorry, UTC draft letter. Do we have anything on that?
I don't have a presentation. I provided the draft letter from the city of Kenmore via email to the council earlier today, along with a piece of Puget Sound Energy's kind of response to that letter circulating. So I don't have a whole lot of answers probably to the questions. I think looking at the letter, I don't have any heartburn if the city wants to sign on to it. I think that the real root of what they're trying to get at, one of the big pieces is trying to switch the factor that they use for determining eligibility for some of their discount programs. Kenmore is urging a switch from the, I'm going to blank on it now, to the AMI from the
Federal poverty level.
Thank you, federal poverty. I knew it was poverty. I was trying to figure out the rest of it, federal poverty level, because their logic, that doesn't really get very deep in our very high income areas. So they're advocating switching to the AMI as part of that calculation. So I think that's really their root piece. I apologize. I don't have a lot more information to share at this point.
Question: What has that historically carried any weight in what we do, or if we sign on with Kenmore, or is that, how's that?
I have limited experience with the UTC in Washington. The city, by way of example, pretty much the experience that I have in my time here, we did draft our own letter to the UTC, if I remember correctly, and it was in regards to a request from Waste Management for a temporary fee increase when they were rehabbing the Cascade Recycling Center. We sent that letter, and I don't recall that we even got a thanks for the letter from them on that.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm in favor of signing on to it. I think it's a good idea. Councilmember Arndt.
Thank you. I wanted to bring this forward. It seems like something that we could do that doesn't actually require a whole lot of effort or skin in the game on behalf of council to just sign on to this letter. And by joining with other cities, we can elevate the potential impact of what Kenmore is trying to ask, which is that PSE change kind of the basis for their low-income reductions on their utility program. Currently, they're using federal poverty guidelines, and so 150% of the federal poverty limit for an individual is $23,000 a year. So you imagine you're not paying a whole lot of utilities at that point. So PSE advertises their program gives between 5 and 45% discounts, but because of their metrics, no one realistically gets more than 5%. So I think I saw the notification come through today that the state of Washington, through Commerce, has just changed all of their energy programs and rebates to use local AMI for exactly this reason, because it is more representative of the needs of our community. And since this came through at exactly the same time that we just awarded money to organizations who help people pay their utilities when they get into financial distress, I would hate for us to just pay PSE through these other organizations when they could be offering some deeper discounts from theirs. So I'm supportive of signing on.
Councilmember Best-Campbell.
I would have been supportive if they would have asked us more than at the last possible second. It doesn't really leave us a lot of time to verify the data that they provided. We have to trust, which I don't think Kenmore is incapable of providing accurate data. I would just like to have had more of a discussion where we would have known a little bit more about the program and what the pitfalls have been. I would have loved to ask PSE how many people actually qualify for the program. If they can, for a straight face, say 12, I would be, I don't think it's either here nor there if we sign on to it. I don't think it hurts us, but in future, I would hope that this would come to us before, 9 o'clock in the morning when we saw this. If really our neighboring communities want us to be a partner, then they need to treat us like a partner and not just a +1. So I'm fine with this the way it is, but in future, I really do think that Kenmore needs to know, and Kirkland and Bothell and whomever else, if they want to ask Woodinville, then they need to include us in the actual discussion process and not just as an afterthought.
Deputy Mayor Randolph.
I first wanted to just thank Councilmember Arndt for bringing this before the council, raising this item, because regardless of the timing of it, I have no idea of the background, but what's come before us is an opportunity to help local communities and for us a chance to participate in fairness and justice and trying to make the playing field a little bit more level when it comes to paying PSE. Just the details that are pointed out in the email about how calculations happen for this savings program means that we'll have more fairness. My question for the city manager, as we move this forward, is this just signing on to the letter? Do we expect there to be an ILA to come back that we'll need to pass with a motion at that time?
No, I think this is, Kenmore's ask at this point is to sign on to this letter, which is intended to be forwarded for the UTC's hearing, which I believe is the 9th next week. So I think this is kind of the bookend on that.
Okay. Do we need a motion to pass or just head nod for agreement?
If there's agreement that sign the letter, I don't think we need a motion for it.
Okay. Given what it is and how it should be helpful, I would definitely be for this.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, we get enough head nods?
Yep, sounds
Okay.
good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Public comments. Nobody signed up second time. Anybody wish to speak? Report to City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Just 2 items briefly this evening. First, we have, as we get ready to kick off the actual construction of our Wood Trails project, we do have a neighborhood meeting with the residents in that area tomorrow evening, where we're going to be on hand to answer any questions, talk about the project and the schedule and all that fun information. So we'll be out there tomorrow evening. The other piece, and I was going to try to share a picture here, but And I love that Kevin doesn't want me to share this picture. We accepted an award last week when we were in Pittsburgh, and this is an award. I'm gonna see if I can share this here. That's us accepting the award there last
That was
week.
the wrong finger you were lifting.
The award that we accepted is the 2024 Voice of the People Award in Transformation and Safety by Polco. So we do the biannual citizen survey that many of you are familiar with, and we brief the council on those results every year. And every year there are awards in 10 categories given to top performing organizations based on those survey results. The VOP awards are the first and only nationally recognized awards given to local governments based on resident feedback. So we'll get a cool little award in the mail eventually. But I think something that we can be very proud of, that particular category highlights the city's dedication in creating a safe and secure community. So accolades there. I thought I'd share both of those. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you very much. Good job. Reports to council members. I'm going to start first this time because I'm so darn excited about it and I wanted the public to know. October 24th, we have a meeting and we have a guest speaker that we're bringing in he wrote a book called For the Love of Cities, and it's to kickstart how we're going to imagine and build out our great city, and I'm really looking forward to it. And everybody I've talked to said he's a great speaker, and it's going to be a joint meeting with planning, council, and public spaces. And so if anybody's interested, October 24th, the speaker will start at 6 o'clock and right here in council chambers. So really looking forward to that. Councilmember Evans.
Thank you, and I'm looking forward to that too, and congratulations to the staff. Just one quick thing, Deputy Mayor Randolph and I have been in connection with Airbnb. As we know, we've had a number of complaints about one nuisance home, and it's been difficult to take action because what's happening is not actually against the law. So Deputy Mayor Randolph got this set up, and we found out that Airbnb, who works in conjunction with VRBO as well, they have 3 really important portals that we could leverage. So first, they have a neighborhood support portal where neighbors can upload pictures and complaints and ask for investigations. They also have a law against party houses. So if there's an ongoing party house that they investigate, they will shut that down. And if Airbnb shuts it down, VRBO shuts it down too. And then the second piece is they have a law enforcement portal. So if there has been any law enforcement action taken, like citations or anything, the law enforcement officer can upload that directly to their portal, and they'll shut down the house immediately, they told us. Because they trust that law enforcement has done their work. And then finally, they have a city portal that we can take a look at. But just knowing that they have these options to go at them other than just customer service, I think is really important. So I'll work with the city manager, Deputy Mayor and I will work with the city manager and our police chief to get this together and see how we can package it up for our community members. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Edwards.
No report this week. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Randolph.
Nothing to report this evening. Thank you.
Councilmember Best-Campbell.
Nothing to report.
Councilmember Arndt.
Thank you. At our last public spaces meeting, which is last week, we got to accept a little sticker to add to our Tree City plaque over on the wall as you're exiting council chambers. We have been a Tree City for 28 years now, officially, and part of what that means is that every year we have some sort of celebration of Arbor Day, and the city this coming year will be doing an Arbor Education Day, similar to what they did last year here at City Hall, and that is going to be on November 16th. It's a Saturday, and I think it's from 10 to 1, but that seems right. Just show up then. Thanks. That's it.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn? Thank you. Sir, when